Thank you so much for joining in. Maybe let's just give a minute or two for folks to start joining in. All right, I think maybe as folks are joining in, I can start off. Firstly, once again, thank you so much for joining in. I think it's great to see so many of you all who've already tuned in for the session. I'm Nitin Boba, AVP at Matrix Partners India, and I look at our consumer tech investments across e-commerce, B2C marketplaces more broadly, as well as consumer brands. For those of you who joined us last week, thank you so much and welcome back. And for those of you all joining us for the first time, welcome. We are pleased to partner with BCG for the launch of our report on the future of Indian consumer tech. This is the second of 3 panel discussions, which will culminate with the release of the report in April. As my colleague Siddharth mentioned last week, we at Matrix Partners are super bullish and big believers in the India consumer internet ecosystem, which is really linked to the larger consumption story of the country. India's GDP is projected to double over the next decade, perhaps sooner, and GDP per capita will rise in the process. The thing to note here is that GDP per capita increases, disposable income will explode, and this will really unlock consumption. We're also a young nation with the second largest internet user base. So couple these two with the excellent logistics infra and the world-class payment rails that we've built out, it's truly a fantastic opportunity for entrepreneurs in India to build large consumer internet businesses. Of course, at Matrix, we've been privileged to have a ringside view of so many such companies in the ecosystem, including Ola, Daily Hunt, Zupi, Dealshare, Stanza Living, Country Delight, and many more. And we're super excited to partner with the next generation of world-class consumer tech companies that will emerge. Today's topic is one that I've really been looking forward to, marketplaces. Marketplaces are probably my favorite type of businesses. They're extremely hard to build, but once built, usually tend to be the most defensible due to network effects and go on to create large companies. India, of course, has also seen many successful marketplaces, both horizontal and vertical. And today we wanted to pick our illustrious panel members' brains on where the next billion-dollar consumer internet marketplace, particularly in commerce, might emerge. Will it be horizontal? Will it be vertical? And how should founders think about these choices, more importantly? With that, let me move on to some quick introductions of our panelists. First up, we have Manish Taneja, who is co-founder and CEO of Purple.com, which of course was one of the first vertical marketplaces in the country. Manish started his career in top investment banks and private equity firms. And in that time, he identified a gap in the market very early on and a need for a strong verticalized play in beauty and personal care, and went on to launch and scale Purple.com, which today, of course, is one of the largest BPC marketplaces in the country. So welcome, Manish. Next, we have Dinkar. Dinkar is the VP and Head of Strategy and Transformation at Flipkart. Dinkar brings a rich plethora of experiences across his stints as a strategy consulting leader, as well as an operator. He's currently like I mentioned, VP and Head of Corporate Strategy at Flipkart, where he works closely with Kalyan on shaping and implementing the overall strategy for Flipkart. He was previously a senior partner at Bain & Company, where he worked across multiple high-impact engagements in e-commerce, consumer tech, telco, and media. Welcome, Dinkar. Very nice to have you. Next, we have Harsh Goyal. Harsh is currently the Director and Head of Everyday Essentials at Amazon India. Harsh is a veteran at Amazon India and is a part of the top leadership there. He has successfully led multiple 0 to 1 and 1 to 100 charters in the last 10 years at Amazon. In his current stint, he is the head of Everyday Essentials portfolio, which includes consumables such as baby, pets, hair, and personal care, as well as Amazon Fresh, pharmacy, and new initiatives related to offerings in health and well-being. Prior to this, he was leading the entire Amazon advertising business, scaling it from zero to one of the largest ad businesses today in the country. Welcome, Harsh. Last but not least, we have Tarun Davada. Tarun is Managing Director, Matrix Partners India, and leads the firm's consumer tech investments. In his 10 plus years as a VC, Tarun has led investments across multiple consumer tech sectors, including in e-commerce and marketplaces, media, social and gaming, and travel and mobility. He has backed some of India's leading startup success stories, including the likes of Ola, Zupi, Dealshare, Stanza Living, Captain Fresh, MoEngage, amongst others. Tarun is an entrepreneur turned VC, and he's had the unique opportunity to build and lead 2 successful internet businesses in India before his transition to the investing world. Welcome, Tarun. Parul, over to you for your intro and opening remarks.
Thanks, Nitin. Good evening, everyone. We are very excited to be hosting this panel discussion. I can promise you right now that this is going to be one of the most exciting and vibrant discussions that you would have seen in recent times. Quick introduction, I'm Managing Director Partner at BCG. I work at the intersection of the consumer and tech spaces along with marketing and sales. So that's really the confluence of the discussion that we're having today. Without any further ado, let me actually just set some quick context, and then we will actually jump right into the panel. If I look at the overall online commerce market, we've seen the first wave of online commerce being driven, of course, by mobile, by electronics and appliances, and well, partly by fashion. As we've looked at this market and we've seen how the pandemic has actually reset the baseline, we actually believe that the next wave of growth in online commerce will be driven by beauty and personal care, by food and grocery, and there will be continued growth in fashion as well. And these three categories put together are going to constitute a significant part of the overall landscape in the next 5 years. What are we here to discuss today, though? If we move forward, we're here to discuss what determines the mix of horizontal versus vertical marketplaces in a category. And very soon, I think you'll hear from one of our panelists that he doesn't even believe in the word horizontal. But we'll come to that discussion fairly quickly. But if I look at what determines horizontal versus vertical marketplaces, there's of course the front end and there's the back end. On the front end, if there is a category where the customer really needs expertise, where the customer requires depth of assortment, where the customer requires quality assurance, or need for consultative selling, and we believe that those categories actually could potentially have a higher mix of verticalization. On the other hand, if I look at the back end, wherever there's greater supply chain complexity, which is primarily looking at sourcing being complex, the supply chain being specialized, logistics being a challenge, and there being some kind of a delivery element as well. We believe if the supply chain is complex, then those kind of categories could potentially be ripe for verticalization. We actually, as a part of all of the work we've been doing with Matrix Partners over the last few months, years, we've looked at several both globally and in India. And you see many of those logos on this page. They have, of course, varying degrees of success. But as we look at these exemplars, we see that there are 4 potential success factors which could potentially ensure success of a vertical commerce play. One is being able to drive consultative selling. As I mentioned already, verticalization makes sense in a category where the customer journey is actually very engaged and the customer requires some kind of assistance in the selling process. And therefore, a vertical commerce player, which actually leverages this by having assisted selling or conversational commerce through sales associates, whether in the store or online, is going to be able to drive that awareness in selling. The second is specialized supply chain in terms of backward integration. Given that that is one of the complexities of a category which is amenable to verticalization, potential backward integration into manufacturing to actually solve for some of the supply side challenges and challenges on the sourcing side can actually guarantee a certain quality of product as well as consistency in the quality at the right prices. The fourth is being able to deliver a differentiated user experience by really leveraging technology. So we talked about the importance of having the human touch in consultative selling. At the same time, making sure that technology is leveraged to ensure that the consumer journey itself does not have the same kind of friction and pain points as would exist in the category otherwise. And then finally, just stronger and better delivery outcomes. So solving for forward logistics challenges to make sure that the product is delivered to the end customer without any damages in the kind of time that the customers learned to expect from vertical commerce players. With that as the baseline, we'll actually jump right in and hear more from our panelists. So the first question is, Manish, for you. I'm going to put you in the spot first. So Manish, you were, of course, one of the first players in the BPC segment. And again, one of the first vertical commerce players in the BPC segment. And I think the question for you is, based on your journey, right? What originally gave you the conviction to start a vertical marketplace in BPC? And, based on your journey, based on your experience, therefore, when does verticalization really make sense for you?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I wish I had so much wisdom when I was starting up. I would probably not start it. So, I think for me, it was category size. I think if you have to build a meaningful business in any category, the category has to be large enough. Whether it's offline, online, I didn't care at that point in time. The category has to have great gross margins so that you can probably disrupt that category from a margin profile point of view. And the category should have, a loyalty amongst consumers where they keep flocking to you all, over and over again, assuming you take care of hygiene and so forth. I think last bit for us that was very important in this category was education, which I think you alluded to in your previous slide is, when we were speaking to customers, most customers didn't know, most of the categories that existed in BPC. And we felt that, through education, if we could, through YouTube and content, if we could educate these customers, we would have them as transacting with us online for the first time instead of going to the horizontals. And therefore, we had a better chance of retaining them. So yeah, look, that's how I thought about it. To your question of, when does verticalization make sense? My point of view is category needs to be large enough. I mean, if it's a very small category, why would you spend your time and energy building a vertical business in it? Of course, it needs to desire an experience which, hopefully a horizontal will find it hard to provide. In our case, one of the other, big advantages that an online vertical marketplace can provide is, you can also provide an omni-channel experience. I mean, even till date, consumers, if they have to try a new product, trying online is still hard. We've not been able to while we have augmented reality on the app, consumers are still a little bit scared about, what kind of shade they're seeing on the screen versus what they would actually get at home. Even if you solve this for lipsticks, how would you solve this for foundations and compact and so forth? So, likewise, there are textural things around in skincare and so forth. So, I think, vertical e-commerce companies can provide an amazing experience to customers by being omni-channel. It's something that horizontals will find it hard to do. But, as I said, first things first, if the category needs to be large enough, it needs to have gross margins, it needs to have high repeats so that, you can build a meaningful business in this category or in any category for that matter.
Yeah. No, makes a lot of sense, Manish. Dinkar, over to you. I think, do you think there's a scope for a new vertical marketplace to be created today? What is your point of view from your vantage point? And do you think one that is created today has a chance to compete against the established horizontals, particularly given the current environment and whatnot?
Yeah, so thanks. And it was great to hear Manish's perspectives. So I think India is too large a country. There will be a variety of marketplaces starting now into the future of all shapes and forms. But yeah, I think there are two parts to my answer. Part one, the way at least I think of it as a personal view of e-commerce more broadly is I think of it as there's consumers who discover something on your app or on your whatever website. There is a set of category assets which you have, which is the selection and the sellers, and then you have the fulfillment engine. That's the four components to what we have. Now, if you were to look at any horizontal platform, there's a lot of diversity. As in categories, assets, and capabilities are fundamentally vertical, and even the horizontals are actually a collection of a set of verticals. So, as in the category capabilities for mobile phones is actually different from fashion, is different from grocery, and all horizontals are actually some kind of a collection, accumulation of these. And that's also true for fulfillment, as in way to fulfill refrigerators is different from the way you serve mobile phones to consumers, and any existing horizontal actually is fundamentally vertical to that extent. The big trade-off actually happens on the upstream side in my mind, which is the number of customers you have access to and the discovery experience, as in how do they actually discover the product in the on your platform. And I think there's an implicit trade-off in there, because see, cost of customer acquisition in India is expensive. I mean, just the structure of way the internet's evolved, and there's a reasonably duopolistic top of the funnel we have here in this country. So cost of customers becomes expensive. And then if your discovery is not unique enough, then there's a trade-off you're sitting at as to saying, hey, do I leverage an existing base, or do I actually build a new expensive base from scratch? By no means does it mean that we are not going to see any more new marketplaces or verticals or horizontals, but it's just that there's a trade-off out there which will actually shape the evolution of this space. And this trade-off is a little bit more pronounced in India, just given the consolidation at the top of the funnel, just the duopolistic nature of the top of the funnel. So that's, I think, one part of it. And the second part, I think Manish alluded to it as well. See, as a vertical, you might have access to a nice fatter gross margin part of the pie, but you need to trade that off against with the cost of customer acquisition. And if you've seen the recent filings, there's a pretty heavy, chunky cost of customer acquisition, which some of the verticals and the D2Cs and others pay. And that's the tension in this business. So there'll be more marketplaces, but I think there's a question which they need to address in the near term on the path to scale. How will they scale? And there is the aggregate context of the fact that India is still $2,200 give or take in per capita GDP. The retail pie is 75% or give or take non-discretionary, in the sense it's all grocery, food, and that kind of stuff, which is bought and sold. So which also leaves relatively finite amount, the room. And on top of that, if you were to layer on our family income pyramid and stuff like that, it actually leaves relatively finite room as well in some of these newer categories. Some of this will change, but the today forward outlook might not actually be that rosy, at least from my vantage point.
Maybe I can just chime in, Parul. I think, Dinkar, I broadly agree with you, but I think, CAC completely depends on your differentiation. If you were to open a new marketplace and be very similar to that vertical with, let's say, Flipkart or Amazon, I guess you will not have a differentiated positioning, and therefore your CAC will not be anywhere that you would like it to be. And so, that probably would not make a lot of sense. But I think CAC is completely a question of differentiation. I mean, one could argue that, if Mamaearth does list at $3 billion price, actually a third of their revenue comes from their own website. So almost a third of their revenue is actually $1 billion business itself, So I think it is completely dependent on differentiation and what you're offering to customers, which, potentially, anybody else is not offering to. That's all I wanted to add. Go ahead, Parul.
Thank you, Manish. And we'll come back to you, Dinkar, for your response to that as well. But before that, I'm actually going to move to Tarun. And Tarun, all of us are talking, but you literally put your money where your mouth is, right? So, we've heard two sides of the story. We've heard, of course, Manish telling us, telling us about the importance of a vertical or a specialist commerce player. We've heard Dinkar telling us about some of the challenges of actually going, vertical or, moving to specialization in a category. How do you look at this tension that's playing out in the market? And, if you had to, of course, put your money behind it, where would you put your money?
Yeah. So firstly, thank you, Parul and Nitin, for sort of moderating this, and Harsh, Dinkar, and Manish, thank you for doing this again with us. Really appreciate it. And I know there will be lots of different views on this panel, and that's also going to make for a very interesting panel for everyone who's joined in. So the way I look at it, Parul, is for any healthy commerce market, you will have both of these coexist, right? And I think both Manish and Dinkar made this point, which is, I think it eventually comes down to differentiation and how are you able to solve the customer's pain point, right? Eventually, great businesses are built with loyalty. Loyalty helps drive customer lifetime value, helps improve sort of unit economics, helps these businesses become viable, right? So to the extent you're able to provide differentiation, to the extent you're able to drive loyalty, to the extent you're able to solve something deep on either supply or demand, you will have a right to play, right? The right to win comes with a lot more, but at least you have a right to exist, right? That's the way I look at it. And for every, we were chatting offline earlier before this. For every Walmart and Target, there is a Zara, there is a Whole Foods, and there's a whole lot of these companies that have always existed in the offline world. I think eventually it comes down to how does the customer perceive you, what's the value you add to their lives, and as long as you're doing that, there will always be this, right? And one can keep arguing that in India, given our sort of structure of the industry, distribution is very hard to build, it's very expensive. So horizontal have an advantage. Absolutely they do, right? But there are certain things that give flexibility to a vertical to solve in a way that the horizontals may not choose to do or may find difficult to do, right? So from our purpose and perspective, I think both opportunities are there, and eventually you need to solve for what the customer is looking for.
Actually, Tarun, that's a good segue. So maybe Harsh, to bring you in, right? I know you don't like the term horizontals, but what in India today, given the market structure, etc., all of that, what in your mind actually makes Amazon, Flipkart, so formidable, right? Is it the higher potential for repeats that they have, and therefore LTV CACs, or is it like Dinkar mentioned, the concentration at the top of the funnel, and they already having a large customer user base, etc. So what do you actually think, right, for the benefit of the audience, make these horizontals so formidable, right? Such strong network effects, or what have you?
Before I answer your question, going back to the original framing of the debate between horizontal and vertical, right? I think my personal view is it's a bit of an oversimplified construct, that there is a horizontal and there is a vertical. In my view, this is more of an evolution from vertical to a horizontal and back to a vertical. And I can give you several examples, including Amazon's example. Like Amazon, what you described today as a horizontal, did not start as a horizontal. In 1994-95, it was launched as a books company. It was only selling books. So it was a vertical at that point in time. And often in many cases, what happens is when you build technology, infrastructure, and you build certain customer loyalty, you start looking at adjacencies. Saying, hey, I'm doing this. Can I also do this category which seems adjacent to this category? So in Amazon's case, from books, it went into music CDs and video CDs. From there, it went into toys. From there, it went into electronics. And from there, it went into fashion. And from there, it went into grocery. So what started as a vertical started adding layers to it. And 20 years down the line, we call it a horizontal. In fact, you would see some, and I'm not saying necessarily every vertical will follow that path, but you see signs of that, by the way, even in countries like India. I wouldn't name the companies, but one of Manish's competitors in that space started with beauty, going into fashion, going into grooming, and now there are reports that they're going into wellness. A well-known grocery company in India is now going into beauty. If you go to their app, there is a separate section for that, right? So there is this one broad arc that you would see, which is verticals. When they develop technology and infrastructure and customer loyalty, they would tend to add adjacent categories to it. There is also the reverse of which what happens. Once you become what you call as horizontal, then you realize that the cookie cutter approach or a one size fit all doesn't work. The customer experience that you need for a fashion, for large appliances, for grocery, for categories is very different. So within horizontal, there would be what the point that Dinkar made earlier, that it is not a cookie cutter approach. There is a one size which fits all, but there is a very concentrated and deliberate effort to make sure that the customer experience of fashion is different from grocery, is different from buying a phone, is different from buying an appliance, right? So I see that way, that it goes both ways, which is not to say that every vertical will end up becoming horizontal. That's not the point. Sometimes it depends on a starting point. If your starting point is you have positioned yourself as a very premium high-end fashion brand, fashion destination, it's very difficult to get out of it, right? but generally this has broadly been the trend, right? I think to the question that you asked me, what makes it hard? I think for a new player to break into it, I think what makes it hard is a combination of things that people talked about, right? Building fulfillment infrastructure is so expensive. Building technology is expensive. It takes years. And acquiring customer and getting customer loyalty is a very drawn out affair. So if you are starting today, you will have to compete against what you call as verticals and horizontals who have already done that. They already have built the infrastructure, they have built the technology, and they have certain varying levels of customer loyalty. So you need to really have a very strong differentiation for customer to even take notice of what you have to offer.
And
Yeah.
just to add, and I 100% agree with Harsh here. The marginal economics when you're a scale horizontal, both on the fulfillment side, on the technologies, all the areas which Harsh named, the customer acquisition side, are actually what makes a horizontal, and loosely using the term horizontal. And those are actually quite robust. And that doesn't mean that they won't be focused players. There'll always be focused players. As I said, India is too large a country, and you'll also have focused players building off of distinct customer bases for that matter. As an all said and done, India, give and take, there are 200 million buyers, give or take, out of a gigantic population. So there's enough headroom, and there will be mechanisms to unpack these bases. Could be actually somebody will unlock a customer base, somebody might actually unlock a unique category. But it's just that they're up against the marginal economics, which will be a reasonably formidable barrier, unless there's differentiation, which is where I think Manish was headed to, which is like very sharp and deep. But even there, I think the constraints of the fact that I think the publications out there which bandy about the size of India's California market being what it is, I think those are also real constraints, that your ability to differentiate with a view to actually build off of, as in to charge a premium or to actually build off a market, is constrained just given the macro economy and what we're operating in. So yeah, so I think there'll be lots of creativity which will come out there, but it's in the envelope, a reasonably tight envelope, if you may ask me, where you have economics, the marginal economics on one side, the constraints of the household wallet on the other side, and actually all the effort which it takes to build businesses. So we as a group, we have a vertical business, we have a customer focused app, we have a big horizontal. We kind of see all these experiments playing out real time. And at least personally, I feel the happiest at the horizontal level as opposed to any of these newer ones, which have to actually go chase down a variety of different objectives at the same time and without necessarily the advantages which a horizontal confers. Yeah.
Dinkar, let me just jump in with one question there. I think, by the way, completely agree with both of you all when you all say that, for some verticals, it's probably just a starting point, right? It's never an ending point. And they may choose, and the example that Harsh gave. Let me try and change that frame of reference, right? Because what we're saying is today market size may be constrained, and to build a large business, to build a business with sort of economics working, one needs to sort of go into adjacent verticals, right? Because you eventually can't change what you stand for in the customer's mind, or you can't completely change the target demographic that you're going after. But the contra argument there is, if we are a 3.5 trillion economy today, 75 years after independence, going to a 7 trillion economy in the next 5 years, right? So we will add as much GDP as we added in the last 75 years in the next 5 years. Hopefully, discretionary spending power goes up sort of non-linearly as a result of that, right? And so I guess the question, going back, I think Manish made this point a couple of times, which is, assuming the market is large enough, one can actually build viable businesses by going deep into a particular vertical. So the question I'm asking is some of what we saw where people are, going into adjacent verticals, either to justify the valuations or to capture larger TAM, is that something that we will see less of as a result of deepening markets?
So two parts to the answer. I think number one, there's always this temptation to go to an adjacent vertical because you get more leverage from your CAC, which you spend. And then that's simple. You have a customer and who's loyal enough, you'd want to sell them other stuff. But I think, and I'd love to hear Harsh's view on this one, but the act of cross-selling is a lot harder than we imagine it to be. As in, this is the counter argument to say why you will not have horizon. It's actually, as in, and we've been added because discovery is chalk and cheese across several of these. As in, the way people discover a mobile phone is different from the way they'll actually discover, let's say, a fashion, a shirt or something like that. And that is actually the biggest barrier to, or whatever, the big challenge which a horizontal would face as they think about this one. And that is something which all these newer ones are branching out. And this is only on the discovery side. There's a similar challenge on the supply side. And if you were running a 1P business, going into building a marketplace is not the easiest thing in the world to do. So, and that actually creates its own downstream problem. So yes, technically you can cross-sell, and that actually is very helpful. But yeah, so it's not as straightforward. That's, I think, one part of the answer, that you would probably see some of these things happening, but they're harder than what we think. So that's one. The second is, the place where I'm super optimistic is actually just the lack of penetration in terms of customers. As in, the headroom which we have on that dimension in India is gigantic. As in, and that is, and not, there are a variety of reasons which actually hold people back. And I think the innovation which we will see there is going to be on that dimension. How do I actually get these new large groups of customers on board and shopping? So if you look at the US, is what the customer penetration, 70% of population there and thereabouts. In China, it's closer to 90%, or not 90, maybe. Yeah, it's still in the 80s. But yeah, in India, it's probably, I don't know, 20, 25, not even 25, it's probably lesser than that. And I think that's where the creativity, so the verticals there'll be set of verticals which are not vertical in that sense, but classes of customers who are actually brought on board into the world of commerce. That would be one space where I'd be surprised if we don't see a lot of innovation and activity in this country in the future.
Thanks. Harsha, do you have anything to add to that?
I think just +1 to Dinkar's comment on that it is not as simple for a horizontal to say, well, we are selling categories X, Y, and Z. Let's also add category A to it. It doesn't work that way. You really have to build out the entire experience that the customer expects for that category. It's not a cookie cutter approach. Like, my team runs grocery, beds, baby, and a few other categories, and pharmacy. And trust me, the approach that we follow for each one of them is dramatically different from, like, I have to do so much context switching during a day because one meeting is so different than others, right? I think going back to Tarun's question on where the large vertical opportunities could exist, I think we should probably look at it in a slightly different way. Given the fact that e-commerce has been in India for probably 13, 14 years, there are 2 large marketplaces and there are some very well-established verticals. In my mind, the most obvious white spaces would have been taken by now. Fashion, beauty, grocery, pharmacy, etc., right? And therefore, you need to approach the problem from a different lens. Like, for example, only large vertical which has emerged in the country in last 3-4 years is a player which attacked the opportunity in a different way, which is to sell unbranded products to tier 3 customers. Saying, everybody is going after these SEC AB customers, selling them branded products, Manishas of the world, right? And that's the only large player which emerged in the last few years. So they followed a very different approach to it, right? Versus saying, well, everybody is selling branded fashion, let me also jump into it, right? I think that approach probably may not be relevant anymore. You need to find a different way of attacking the problem. Like, for example, nobody in my mind has done a brilliant job of combining products and content and services together. Like, there are many categories where you need to combine selling a product with content which educates the customer about that product, and some services around it. Like an example, hypothetically, which I can give you is there are certain chronic ailments like diabetes, blood pressure, some heart ailments, right? They have all three dimensions to it. There are certain medicines, devices that those customers buy at regular times. They need content because they want to be educated and understand that how they can take care of themselves. And there's also a space for services, some sort of a consultation with a doctor in a lightweight way. So if you just try to say, well, I'm going to sell these medicines online or this blood pressure devices online, I don't think that approach is going to work because frankly, there is no dearth of those options online. But if you attack the problem that I will bring everything together, I will bring products, I will bring content, I will bring services along with it so that it creates a very unique and differentiated experience for the customer. That's a one-stop. If you have diabetes, unfortunately, this is a one-stop app for you, whatever you need for that. So I think the approach needs to be different for creating a new, what you call as vertical marketplace, in my opinion.
Great. Thanks, Harsh, and to the audience. When this becomes the next unicorn, you heard it in this panel first. But let me actually, go back to Manish. And I think one consistent theme that we have heard is the challenge on profitability, and of course, driving profitable growth. In fact, that's come up in the questions as well. But that's one of the big tensions around how do you actually make a vertical commerce player, scale up in a profitable manner. We've also seen at the same time many vertical commerce players actually diversify across multiple channels. So not just digital, but also going offline. We've seen that happening in furniture and home decor. We've seen that happening in BPC and so on and so forth. What is your perspective? Of course, having scaled Purplle to where it is today, what would really drive profitable growth for a vertical commerce player? And how does the entire channel interplay fit into that story?
Yeah. I think profitability is completely driven by your differentiation. There is nothing else that you can do. If there is a consumer who's buying something from you that he or she cannot get anywhere else, you can make more money there. And if you are selling what everybody else is selling, you'll have to be price competitive, and that would erode all your gross margins. So I think profitability, for vertical e-commerce companies and is there to get if you can differentiate yourself. If you can't, and you can differentiate yourself on supply or on your demand creation capabilities, but if you can, I think then you can get to profitability. As far as we are concerned, we will get there in like a couple of quarters or so, post corporate, overheads as well. So I think it's pretty achievable as long as you focus on differentiation. You can't be incrementally better than others because consumers won't pay for it. You have to be reasonably different from others so that some consumers will pay for it, and that's what will make you profitable. On your question on, going offline, I think what we've seen is, and we've only had I would say 5-6 months of data on going offline, and we only have 8 stores right now. What we've seen is consumers are shopping everywhere, be it online or offline. I don't think consumers are restricting their purchases to just online or just offline. We do recruit a lot of customers who shop everywhere. And one of the very fascinating things we've seen in a very short time frame, which actually has given us a leg up on, opening omni-channel even more, is what we've seen is many customers which we thought were churn customers of Purplle have actually shopped at our store in the last 3 months now. They had actually not shopped at Purplle for the last 2 years. After they've been reactivated at the store, now they've also shopped on Purplle online in the last 3 months. So we've reactivated a lot of our customers in those zip codes where we actually opened our stores, where we had practically lost them. Now they've started going to our store, and now they've actually come back and shopped online as well. So it's a very nice interplay that plays between online and offline. I think consumers, obviously there are some consumers who are very, very online first and they don't like to shop offline. But I would say most consumers will, we'll have a wallet share divided between online and offline. And I think we've seen it play out for a large number of our consumers in those pin codes. We're very excited about the omni-channel play that, we can bring to our consumers. And, from a long-term value of a customer point of view, I think it works out quite well.
Arun, just to bring you in, right? One of the questions I've been hearing a lot from prospective founders when I'm, talking to them, brainstorming, etc., on new ideas in e-commerce. A question that repeatedly comes up is on just this entire piece around CAC, right? Customer acquisition cost. Given that generally as a secular trend, CACs have gone up for B2C, not just in commerce, but everywhere, right? Are investors in the mindset today to sort of, and for a large marketplace, a lot of that cost has to be front loaded, right? Before they actually start seeing money via the customers that they've acquired. So a question that we often hear is, are investors in the frame of mind today to actually, fund such businesses, etc., given everything that we're seeing play out globally? Would love to hear your inputs on that.
Yeah. No, great question, Nitin. Actually, I want to just add, and maybe plus one to what Manish said around sort of offline. See, web versus mobile, online versus offline. Honestly, this is all inside out, right? Like the customer really doesn't care. The customer doesn't wake up in the morning and say, "Yeah, this lipstick I want to buy online, but that other foundation I want to buy offline." Right? It's if you are relevant to the customer and you are there at the sort of point of purchase, you will be relevant and you will end up getting some market share from that customer. And we've seen this, right? Again, without getting into individual names of companies, pretty much every vertical that has scaled has ended up needing to build some significant offline presence to bring salience in the customer's mind. It's given them both depth and sort of scale as well as profitability, right? And so it's about becoming more relevant as part of the customer's journey. It's less about, am I online, am I offline? I mean, you go back to the customer and you start thinking from their perspective. One of our companies, in fact, again, I won't name it, is essentially going through that same journey. And it's not because they feel that the TAM is limited or something of that sort. The online TAM will just keep growing. It's actually about making sure, and to Manish's point, customers that have churned see you offline, not only transacted with you offline, but also start coming back online and transacting with you, because you become part of that consideration set again, and you're more sort of relevant to them. Coming to your point, Nitin, and we've discussed this internally a lot. I think the days of investors funding, high cash burn, high marketing driven businesses are over, until they are not, and the next bubble comes back. But at least for now, I think it's over. And internally, we've always discussed that marketing should be used to sort of fuel the fire, not to light the fire, right? You can't use marketing dollars to get the 0 to 1, to get the early PMF, because those will end up being false positives. It's very easy to delude yourself into saying, hey, I've got true PMF, because you're just burning marketing dollars to grow. It looks great for a while, but then the day you turn off the marketing tap, you're in for this rude surprise that, actually the PMF that we had was all marketing driven. So in my mind, I think those days are over, and founders and investors overall as an ecosystem, we are far more mature about it today than we were a few years ago. Second is, I think, different points in this conversation, people have spoken about, depth of market, wallet share, etc., and sort of how much is sort of the spending power of the transacting user base today. While I am a big believer that that base is only going to expand and their sort of discretionary spend is only going to expand over the next few years, I do think there's very little one can do to change lifetime value. As an entrepreneur, beyond the point, you're operating in a structure of a market where the frequency is what the frequency is and the average spend is what the average spend is. What you can do is change your distribution, change your business model, change your go-to-market to structurally bring down CAC. And so as an entrepreneur, if I had to start, for me, it's like, listen, LTV is a given. Itna LTV hai, utne LTV mein I have to make the business. It's the CAC which I need to solve for first, right? And as long, and to, I think Manish again said this really well, is if I build enough differentiation, if I have a creative GTM, that's how, I can bring that LTV CAC equation to work. There's little I can do as an entrepreneur to change lifetime value of a customer, at least in the short run.
Yeah. Thanks, Tarun. In fact, building on that, Harsh, a question for you. And I think you're in a unique role, as you said, of where you're trying to you're building a vertical within what we call a horizontal. You're focusing on grocery, pharmacy, health within the overall marketplace of Amazon. So, can you give us specific examples of where, you've actually had to go deep in terms of specialization to really be able to deliver that kind of either consumer experience or solve for the backend? And second, where you've actually got some advantages of being housed within a broader horizontal marketplace.
Yeah, for example, let's talk about grocery, which is such a difficult business. The grocery ki supply chain is completely different than supply chain for rest of products, because you need refrigeration and you need inventory to be placed very close to the customer, etc., right? So for Amazon's grocery business or Amazon's fresh business, we had to build a supply chain which is dedicated for grocery. We're not leveraging Amazon's broader supply chain in the country, right? Even in terms of the customer experience, there are huge differences in how a customer shops for grocery versus how a customer shops for, let's say, electronics. And we have to factor that in how our experience is designed. Like if you imagine yourself as a customer, when you go shopping for grocery, your shopping mission is driven not as much by search, but a lot by browse. By that, what I mean is you go to a store nearby with certain intent in mind. Well, I need aloo pyaz, something. And that's why you end up going to a grocery store. But if you imagine yourself walking away from the grocery store, walking back home, you would have picked up 10 different things on the shelf, which was never in your shopping list to begin with, right? So it's not a very sharp search-driven shopping mission. It's a lot driven by merchandising, browse, what you see in the aisle, and it tempts you and it reminds you, oh, I'm running out of this. Oh, let me try this out, right? So in Amazon Fresh, for example, if you enter the Fresh store, it is very different than rest of Amazon. It is much more browse-based, which means that you can enter a search query and you can add the stuff to the cart, but then there's a lot of browse-based experience, which is a lot of serendipity and that kind of stuff. And we have to simulate that. Where we have leveraged Amazon ecosystem, one is obviously rather than building a separate app where you have to drive distribution and that is super expensive, we have built an app within an app. Like it's literally that. Like within the Amazon app, there is a tab on the top left bar which says it's similar to what you see in Flipkart as well, right? You literally click on that. And so we are leveraging the broader distribution. We don't have to create our own app. Similarly, we are leveraging a lot of technologies like search technology. It's so hard to build grounds up. We haven't built search technology for Fresh. We are using Amazon's technology. Customer service. We're not building our own customer service. We have trained customer service associates for nuances of grocery, but our customer service is same as the rest of Amazon, right? So it's a bit of build where you really have to build and leverage where you can. So supply chain, we had to build browse-based experience. We had to build, but build on the same app, don't spend money on distribution, and use technologies like search, because who wants to reinvent the wheel, and use customer service versus building an own customer service, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Harsh. Moving on, I think we've been getting a lot of questions from the audience. So maybe just take a little bit of time to get to some of these. I think the first one, maybe Manish, you can take this one. I think folks have been asking, any comments on content to commerce story? Is it actually playing out, or is it just a few companies trying to make it seem bigger than it actually is? What are your thoughts on it, given that, obviously beauty as a category leverages content quite significantly? Would be good to hear your thoughts.
Other than VCs, do customers actually believe in the story? That's the question.
So I think my point of view on this is, content will stay on content platforms. I don't think we will be able to build distribution as a vertical e-commerce player to drive downloads and distribution of our app just because we want people to watch our content and then transact. And also, I think there's a lot of serendipity in play here. So you have to figure out your attribution logic here, where, if somebody's watched a piece of content or clicked on something, when did they come and shop? Did they buy the same product that was there, or did they buy something else, and so on and so forth. Look, I think, if you have to be practical about this. I think it's very hard to build a content company that operates at scale that is meaningful for an e-commerce company to sort of leverage. And so my personal feeling is, I think content will stay on content platforms, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, or Stage for Bharat, or whatever that may be. I think we are very happy to leverage that content in a very viral way, both on YouTube, Instagram, and other platforms, to create demand for differentiation on the platform. And I think commerce will be a small part of that, consumer set who's actually watching content. I think building a content plus commerce in the same app, I think is a far-fetched dream right now. I think it'll not happen in the very near future. Maybe horizontals who have like a very, very large MAU and DAO, because they're already so well distributed, they can perhaps create content for engagement, and therefore drive, better LTV and better discovery for their customers. But, for companies which like us, where, our MAU and DAOs are still, I would say, less than 10, 15 million, people, I think we're better off using content on content-focused platforms.
Got it, Manish. Thank you for that. Dinkar, I think the next one maybe you can take. I think there's a question here on, is trust a big factor in buying beauty, etc. But I'll just take that and abstract that a little bit, right? Which is connecting that to the sort of earlier point you were making, which is the headroom in India is immense. And one of the sort of barriers or impediments today is sort of lack of trust, right? In a large part of the population. So how do you think about that, right? To expand and make, go deeper into that headroom. Are there, any trust mediation mechanisms? I think we've seen some versions of that in the past, right? Anything you can think of to really increase that headroom?
Yeah, so I don't have a ready answer into what do we do to leap for. There is a trust barrier. I think it'd be wrong for me not to say it's not there. And I think there's probably many flavors of the trust barrier. So again, last I looked at, there were like what, 250, 300 million UPI active accounts in the country linked to UPI. So there are people transacting on them, but the transacting customers on an e-commerce platform would be much lower. As in across all e-commerce platform, unique users would be somewhere in the range of 150 to 200, I don't know. So there's clearly a trust barrier which exists between just making a digital payment to actually buying an item digitally. So that's arguably there's a bigger trust barrier above the 300 million accounts in India which are UPI linked, where it's actually even digital payments might be a bit of a barrier. So there is a trust barrier which needs to be overcome. It's also, and I think there are a variety of ways to, as in the Chinese, or if I were to look at PDD, they kind of got around the trust barrier a little bit through group, as in through referrals, the communities, leveraging the offline communities to actually, or bringing them online to unlock commerce. So that's one way of doing it. There are many other ways, and different people in the world have tried different approaches, but it's a real barrier. As in, that's, if there's one question we as a company wrestle with on a very regular daily basis, is to actually move our number of customers up, and which requires us to actually activate a bunch of guys who stop buying from us, but also push the envelope on the newer guy to e-commerce. So you could arguably do, one way to do it is actually lower the cost, as in the downside of e-commerce. So, and that's what we're trying to do with Shopsy, to take out the frills, make it so low cost that the mistake might not actually be expensive for the customer. That's one way to do it. There are other ways, and Chinese, as I said, PDD tried the group buying route. There are other routes as well, as in the video, again, it's Chinese phenomenon, the video commerce route of where you stretch your garment in 15 different ways before you're buying it. That could be another way of approaching it. There are a variety of routes, but I think none of them has really caught fire yet in India. Hopefully we will stumble onto the right answer, and that's probably going to be the next wave of growth for e-commerce, at least from my vantage point in India.
And Dinkar, just a quick follow-up on that, right? Any double click on why is this trust barrier proving to be so difficult to breach in your conversations with customers or otherwise?
So two parts to it. One is and which is I think where there was the offline conversation previously as well. As in the physicality of offline actually communicates an element of trust. So the act of actually transacting, there's a very true trust dynamic as to say, hey, I buy something, what if it doesn't turn up? What if a stone turns up? What if, and there's a varieties of levels of trust which people actually demonstrate. That's one. There's a bigger factor around remorse, as in, see, for better or for worse, with the exception of maybe grocery or some parts of the home vertical in Harsh's world, you have things which are fundamentally discretionary purchases. So in my given constrained wallet, do I want to spend the X hundred rupees remaining for my discretionary purchase on a slightly iffy online transaction? So it's the fact that actually if it was so it kind of, the stakes are a little bit higher as we go deeper into the country in terms of what's the opportunity cost of 1 rupee wasted on place A versus place B. Then third, there's this internet related trust issues in general as to fraud, fake, all those 20 different challenges we get. It's a layered problem. It's not a very simple problem. The trust means different things to different people, and we spend a lot of time and effort and money trying to actually demystify what does trust mean and what do we do to actually unlock that. And also given, I think Tarun made that point around, hey, we have finite frequency, as in frequency is what it is in India. Now, even the way we skin trust has to actually be different in a low frequency environment than in a high frequency United States of America, where people go through like 50 different transaction cycles. So you can actually use the post order funnel to build trust. So it's also a little bit of both sides of the equation have to come together. The pre-order side, the post-order side, to actually re-emphasize or reinforce trust in the platform. Not sure I answered your question directly, but it's a
no, that's very helpful, Dinkar. Yeah, like you said, it's a layered, multi-dimensional, complex problem. So no easy black and white answers, of course. But thank you for that. Parul, you want to?
Fantastic. So I think we're almost at the 6:59 mark, and I think it's been an outstanding discussion. I have personally taken away a lot. So thank you for your time. But of course, to close out, we will do a rapid fire. Nitin tells me there's a coffee hamper waiting to be shipped to whoever wins this, and we'll do an audience poll. So please make sure your responses are exciting. But obviously, I'm a consultant, so I have 3 questions into one. So the first question is one word to define the consumer tech ecosystem in your perspective. So one word to define, to describe the consumer tech ecosystem in your perspective. The second is, if you had to pick one category where you think horizontals will always be the market leaders, what would that one category be? And of course, the corollary to that question, if you had to pick one category where you think it will be the vertical or the specialist commerce players that will truly be able to deliver the right value for the consumer, what category would that be? So just to repeat, first is your sentiment about the consumer tech ecosystem. Second is category where horizontals will always reign supreme. Third is a category where vertical commerce players will really be able to offer that consumer value. And let me start with Harsh.
I would describe consumer tech ecosystem as humongous unfulfilled opportunity. We are at a very early stages of it. The opportunity is huge in my opinion, right? The second question you had is one category where horizontals would always have an edge over others. I would say books. Very hard to differentiate customer experience on books. Books is largely about aggregating selection. There are not too many dimensions left out there which you wouldn't find on existing sites where you can differentiate a lot, right? The third, you said categories where verticals do better. I mean, you don't have to think hard about it. Just look at where the verticals are.
One word answer, one category.
Fashion.
Fantastic. Thank you. Dinkar, your view, please.
Yeah, so I'd go with vibrant for consumer internet. I think there's been a lot of bloodbath, but there's good stuff to happen. As we are whatever, we are warming up. It's the net practice in the cricket match. We haven't started yet in India. To your vertical, I'd actually steal from Harsh a bit. I'd broaden it to say it's actually the long tail, as in the long tail categories are something where a horizontal will always have an advantage. Because just to Manish's point from earlier, the TAM is not big enough for a vertical to actually spend their time and effort. And I think books is the ultimate horizontal, as an ultimate long tail. Sorry, so to that extent. So yeah, that I stole it from Harsh to that extent. Yeah, and the third question of so there again, experience heavy categories. So beauty would actually be in the same bucket. Fashion, the verticals will have, and especially experience heavy, more premium categories, as in where there's more money riding as well. There'll always be a vertical advantage, which the more functional the stuff gets, the horizontal is more likely to win.
Fantastic. Manish, your perspective?
My sense is, I think we're in a very exciting times. I think, like my sentiment is this is like there's very exciting times in India. I think next 10 years are going to be quite amazing. Whoever can sort of sail through it. While I do shop a lot of books on Amazon, I would say, lately I've also observed that offline stores in books are actually pretty amazing for serendipity they offer on discovering books. I still think discovering books on horizontals is hard. Like if you know what you want to buy, you can obviously, go to a horizontal and buy. But I have some favorite bookstores in Bombay that I do visit every 2 weeks or so. And, I think discovery of books is quite amazing offline as well. And like, I think a category that would, I think, do very well, in a vertical format. I think grocery could be a big, large category. I think BPC could be one. And of course, I think fashion. I think those were 3 that I would pick.
Fantastic. Tarun, you have the last word.
It's hard to go after all these 3 gentlemen, but I think for me, roller coaster is the word to describe the consumer tech ecosystem. Just
I must say, I really like how the founders and the entrepreneurs and the CXOs versus the investors are very interesting.
Yeah, I think just when you think you've seen all the excitement, there's more, and there's both steep ascents and steep descents along the way. So it is a true roller coaster, and again, very excited about sort of what the next 10 years will unfold. I think on the category, really nothing different to add. Any standardized product where if I buy it, it's the same product with a very undifferentiated sort of buying experience. I think those are most, I guess, easy for and most relevant to a horizontal to solve, whether it's books, electronics, so on and so forth. I think somebody used the word high experience categories. Whether it's furniture, whether it's, I think some of those are obviously, grocery is a big one. I think those are most relevant for verticals. Or I would say verticals have a play over there. It's not that horizontals can't or won't solve them as well. They will, but I think verticals have a right to play over there.
Just one last comment from my side, right? This fashion BPC space, why I said it is like everybody else, it's more amenable to verticals. One is the experience dimension of it. These are very experiential categories. There's a second subtle part to it. These categories are a lot about marketing and positioning. How you position your brand in minds of a consumer. There, I do believe that a dedicated site has an advantage because they can take a unique positioning. For a site which sells everything from books to electronics to groceries to fashion to beauty, taking that unique positioning for fashion and beauty in minds of a consumer is hard, because consumers associate with you with grocery, with you with electronics, with you with appliances, you with books. So I think that there is also a marketing positioning angle.
I think it's a great point, especially in terms of price points and different price points you play. I think
these categories are about as much about experience as it is about positioning. This is a softer element to it, which is hard. It's an intangible thing, hard to quantify.
Yeah,
Fantastic. And on that note, I know, we're 6 minutes over time. And honestly, I'm sure we could, if I look at the audience questions, we could probably spend another 3 hours discussing and debating. But this has been exciting, energizing, vibrant. So thank you so much to our outstanding panelists for making the time. Nitin, would you like to close out, please?
No, nothing more to add from my side except for fantastic discussion. Thank you so much. I mean, one just needs to look at the audience questions to see the level of engagement. And really, really thank you for your time and insights. Thank you, Dinkar, Harsh, Manish, Tarun. Great to have you. And audience, please do join us for the next one as well. Obviously, we will share the details on LinkedIn and other places. Thank you so much, everyone.
Nitin, you were quiet on the
Bye-bye.
coffee hamper. Huh? We all were waiting for that.
There'll be one for all of you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
all the
Bye.
time
Thank
you
you.
were taking.